Because now, rather than just help people, you're taught a little bit about the cost burden on society. See, they're all going to eventually work in a form of socially backed medicine. Most of it is, even in the States, their private hospitals get massive grants. They get massive from different funding from different areas. I've yet to meet a big corporation yet that doesn't live on corporate welfare of any kind, any type of corporation. The bigger they are, the more so they do it. So what you do is you start training them in a humanistic way, and when you've already created an atheistic society, which is interesting to see how they stage it all, and they keep pulse of it all, and they know exactly when to start. Let's teach them this now, you see, and they'll be humanists, and we'll tell them that, you see, these people here are sick, and they're going to pass on their bad genes to children. And, well, we can't just sterilize them at the moment. It wouldn't be ethical, and there'd be a massive backlash. Therefore, blah, 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 blah. And that's really how a lot of them are taught in this day and age. And it's true enough. You understand, the old idea of control is there's no such thing as open control. Like, everybody's allowed to do their own thing in a democracy. Don't fall for that one, for goodness sake. There's always control in the big system in which we live, always control. And like a big business plan, every part of it is planned like a long-term business plan. Different parts of the agenda to be introduced at a certain year, and they hope to have you here by this time, blah, 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 blah. Just like the articles I read from the military academies and the think tanks, which they published back in about 2008 or whatever it was, for the British military, first of all, which coincided with the later American one too. And also for NATO, the same think tanks who work for NATO. And they were kind of futuristic societies and how the military have to change for the first coming and so on. But they did mention the massive population increase due to mass movements of people. But don't worry, it would start to flatten out about the year 2050. Well, you see, at the speed we're going now, for indoctrination and for PC, political correctness, and your updates by watching the same standardized memes on television and movies and so on at the same time across the planet, it makes sense. Because by then, very few folk will choose to have children at all. Even less than you have today. And that will go too for all the recent immigrants, the descendants of the recent immigrants that have come in through all the wars that's been caused across the Middle East and elsewhere. They'll also have children growing up who will be trained to go for the material goods for themselves, to live in a happy life and all that, and not to want children, or even a mate for that matter. If it's just sex, as they say, well, is separated from marriage, is separated from love and bonding, just have sex, there you go. But don't get bonded, don't get married or have a mate, not for any length of time at least, and for goodness sake, don't have children. And that's how it's going today, of course. We truly are trained. And if you dig in to UNESCO, that Julian Huxley was the head of for a long enough period, and if you even care to know, most folk don't, but if you even care to know what made the guy, Julian Huxley, to be this almost a freak of eugenics and to understand his personality and his character in the early 1900s, he believed, and again from his family lineage, etc., and from the Huxleys being part of Darwin's bulldogs, he really believed that the elite, the masses of illiterate, low-class populace, the working type poor, would outbreed the elite, and that was a big fear they all had. He wrote about it and talked about it, and that's why he said they'd have to form a society, a secretive society, using science or the guise of science to change the whole world. And they'd also have to give lots of incentives to find a better stock of people amongst their own groupings and have them breed as many children as they could. And out of that whole idea, you got different books, The Handmaid's Tale, all these different kind of things, and dystopian futures, right down to Brave New World, written by his brother Aldous Huxley. A society where everyone would be basically from the same, you might say, test tube, and they would get the better genes and split them off into many pairs and so on, and grow perfectly standardized groups of people for different functions who would be happy what they did and cause little trouble. Even the ones who did the menial tasks wouldn't cause much trouble at all. They'd be bred to I mean really bred to accept their work quite happily. So yeah, Julian Huxley was an absolute elitist. I mean, folk have no idea the history behind our present society and where we are today. They have no idea at all. Because they're trained to believe that somehow we just stumble along day by day, and those at the top stumble along day by day, and we just stumble down through time. And things change out of almost spontaneously by themselves. They have no idea the massive planning that goes in and the training of each generation of the populace, so that when they grow up, all the big changes are quite natural to them. They think that it's their own doing that the changes happen. No, it's not. No, it's not at all. I'll put up some links to articles about Huxley, Julian Huxley. One of them especially is to do with a good part of his life and how he worked at UNESCO and his real points of view and so on, and the other organizations he belonged to as well. And it's called Julian Huxley, Continuity of Eugenics, 20th Century. I'll put it up because even in the bottom, when you scroll down and you look at all of the different articles, from university articles mainly, about Huxley and his impact on the system and society of today, with planned abortions and eugenics being introduced all over the place. And again, promiscuity was all part of his agenda too, from the earlier 1920s onwards, as a form of breaking down society and to eliminate the bonding aspect of sexual activity, separate it altogether. It's incredible how it's all happened, really. And he was only one of a group working together that made all this happen, with the massive funding from the foundations and the Rockefeller group as well. I mentioned Rockefeller because you find it was Rockefellers that also sponsored the so-called studies by the sexologist Kinsey, with the Kinsey Institute. And he fudged most of his studies, in fact, it was Kinsey, to get society to start to experiment and all that. A big agenda behind it all. But it's fascinating to see, as I say, the amount of books and articles written about Julian Huxley and United Nations, UNESCO, etc. And eugenics. They were heavily involved in eugenics for superior species. Don't forget, too, that he also coined the term transhumanism. He believed that we could be forced to evolve through our own involvement in changing genes and tampering with genes and so on, and that you could create a transhumanist society. It's all here. Everything's happened today, even with different gender topics and so on. Of today, he was up there from the 1920s onwards, advocating all this stuff and working hard with other groups and other specialists, you might say, to make it all happen. Social experimenters. Quite amazing. So I'll put that one up too. And also eugenics, mental deficiency, and Fabian socialism between the wars. Because again, the H.G. Wells and other members of the Fabian Society in socialism were simply the left wing of the same bird that had the right wing of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, run all sides and train even those you're going to change, train them all. So you must get the working classes. They were the main target for all. Quite amazing, isn't it? And how blatant they were too, even in the 1800s, how blatant with their books about changing the whole planet basically, and directing its growth and its changes themselves. And intergenerational leaders, people who were the sons and daughters of the leaders, still today managing the whole darn thing, a lot of them. So I'll put some of these up too to let you see where it talks. So, I mean, here's one too about these eugenics experimenters and promoters. It talks about this article here about the Fabians and the socialist left, the men and women, are revered to this day. So George Bernard Shaw, founding member of the Fabian Society along with the Wells, could insist that the only fundamental and possible socialism is a socialization of the selective breeding of man, even suggesting in a phrase that chills the blood that defectives will be dealt with by means of a lethal chamber. Now, don't think that the present groups that are in their 20s, maybe up to the age of 30, are somehow, and who have got the green hair and all that, and they're even changing genders. Don't think they all decided to do all this by themselves. Any more than the lethal chambers that we're prattling about here weren't taught to their parents, actually, to their parents, who were taught that mainly through fiction, but again, in academia, these things were brought up to try to get them on board with it all. I'm talking about their parents. They're maybe in their 60s today. And if you look at the old Star Trek series, the Star Trek series put a lot of this stuff out in a fictional form. It's the greatest way to get ideas across. Because your barriers are down, your firewall is down, and you think you're getting entertained. But I can remember rewatching not too long ago one of the ones in Star Trek where they land on a planet and they have basically euthanasia chambers, because the wars that they have with these other people, they use planets as opposed to just countries. It's the same thing, you see. And because they were so destructive in these wars, they actually would simply have computers pretend that through randomly that a missile had hit your little town or village and took out so many of your people. It'd give you a number, and it would also give you a list of the ones in that area that it pretended to hit. Just like a video game. They'd walk into chambers, and they're obedient and all went and got done. If they didn't go, the guards came and took them and pushed them into it. And in the episode, they even had a very superficial debate as to why it was a good thing. Well, they're different cultures, and so well, it worked for them, and it's true enough, you don't have any mass destruction and so on. That's how they get ideas across to you. Another one, too, was Captain Kirk ends up transporting somewhere. He ends up instead on a duplicate Enterprise ship that nobody's on initially. There's just nobody there except himself. And then he meets a girl. Then you get little glimpses of faces looking into the portholes and looking through into the ship. Occasional little glimpses. And it turns out that the people from a planet who are overpopulated to such an extent they had no room to move. Plus, and here's the key to it all. H.G. Wells complained about this too. He says, if you help the poor and all the rest of it and divert people from dying of sicknesses and diseases and all the rest of it, you'll get overpopulated. Well, that was in the Star Trek episode. These people had conquered death pretty well, or because they had no disease and they could stop aging. So they grew to a certain age and stayed at it and just lived in this kind of Hades, rubbing shoulders with each other forever, and it was terrible. So the girl was sent out by a committee in order to contract germs off Kirk, germs from a different planet that they didn't have any immunity to help start killing them off and thinning out their population. That's how they get ideas across. So don't think the present ones, who really seem so different, came to these decisions by themselves to behave the way they're behaving. It's all programmed through entertainment and through their education at school, step by step by step. Beria, don't forget, in the Sovietized system of the 1930s, with the Comintern meetings that they had, international communism, that went over to their big world meetings in Russia, he said that it used to take them a whole generation, which was about 70 years, to alter society in an incrementally in any particular direction. So 70 years just to get them to change from seeing sex as this to something else, you see. As an example. He says, but now, with the planning, meaning the planning ahead with changes and, say, 10-year changes and 20-year changes to implement different parts of different agendas, but he said we can literally upgrade them with intakes of children every 4 years, so that perfectly, as they come into the age of 20, what was going to introduce at that time, they'd be mentally trained to accept, because they'd heard it before. It's a perfect system. And that was without the computer. Today it's too easy with mass communication, because they all get the same memes traveling across at the same time. They all watch the same reality shows like Love Island. It's all over the place. I haven't seen it because I don't watch TV, but it's in all the papers, to make sure that the folk who haven't seen it should look at it and see it. And apparently they have a kind of reality show with sex. And that's how you get updated with things, you see. You're always getting updated. And entertainment, though, is the best way to do it, because they can dramatize anything at all through fiction, slanted any way they want, until, the power of Hollywood is incredible, or the stage even. But Hollywood definitely, through the music they use, the emotion they use, they can have you crying or laughing at things perhaps you shouldn't cry at in the first place, or laugh at either. That's a tremendous power, and they know it. That's why you always take over culture, and the communists knew that too. And what's even more fascinating, if you look at the communists, so don't forget the Soviet Union of the Socialist Republic, it was Socialist Republic, USSR. And it's also Soviet, which meant ruled by councils, and that's their NGOs of today, folks. They're fronting for the big foundations that fund them and train them. No one alters and chooses anything for themselves in the society unless they're being programmed to do so. It's true, you know. Now, eugenics, awfully important, as I say. Now, in the 70s, everybody who studied medicine knew, I think in the back of their mind, that this whole push towards that was getting taught in medicine, that their hope in the future would be through eugenics and the study of genetic manipulation. Anybody who really studied it deep enough and long enough knew that they were really talking about the whole field of medicine was going to be purely eugenics based, in that they'd breed out the bad genes and they'd select the good genes, just like Brave New World. That's exactly what they're doing today, as you well know. Our systems across the world now have resuscitate tabs and don't resuscitate tabs for different patients, depending on who you are, your standing, and everything else in society. There's been accidents, well, you can't call them accidents in Britain and other countries that hit the papers, because even children are being given little tabs, don't resuscitate, and the wrong ones are being given that. They found that recently, had some cases in because, as I say, medicine is not all it's cracked up to be, and a lot of people who are practicing it shouldn't be practicing it in the first place. But genetic manipulation is obviously the answer to it all. It's your fault, you see, that vaccine makers are awfully good at this today. And you've all read the articles. I've read them out too. When I was on every night in the week on radio, the articles to do with vaccines having terrible reactions on some people. Awful and some lethal as well, depending on the type of vaccine, etc. And the answer that the vaccine industries were doing at the time was to tell the people they had the wrong genes. That's why. Oh, there's no such thing as having the wrong genes. These people were perfectly healthy. Without the vaccines, they'd had a normal life. So, but that's all they could dream up as well. They had the wrong genes, because ours is meant for folk within a certain range of particular genes. That's their excuse for it. So you think they don't practice eugenics today, and they blame the victim? Well, they certainly do. Certainly do. And now, as I say, with eugenics, they're offering you, before they'll offer you any other treatment, even long-term treatment, and you could live for years, maybe quite happily. But they've decided that your quality of life isn't up what they're deciding it should be, even if it's quite okay for you. And they're offering you this cheap exit pill. Quite amazing, isn't it? But again, most folks today will think I should agree with them. Well, yeah, they might as well, Well, I'm not talking about people who there's always been assisted suicide. Always been assisted suicide. And they didn't have to apply for it or to get the medications to do it. When the state's sponsoring it and advocating it, it's a different story, you understand? And they're doing it to the elimination of any other treatment because it's economically healthier for them. They can give more money to some of the specialists that are raking it in, or those who own the hospitals. The big CEO boys or girls. Now, Julian Huxley, one of his friends was Mary Stopes, honoured with a postage stamp in 2008. Was a hardline eugenicist, and that she determined that the hordes of defectives would be reduced in number, thereby placing less of a burden on the fit. These are her words, she said. She later disinherited her son, this Marie Stopes. Isn't that wonderful? Because he had married a short-sighted woman, thereby risking a less than perfect grandchild. Again, pure eugenics. These people, were truly the hygiene specialists, you might say, the racial hygiene specialists. Way beyond even what they had in Nazi Germany. Because they wanted not just their own population, but the whole world to go through this. Quite amazing, eh? And they get honoured today. And the folk who honour them haven't got a clue of the other side of this. Oh, they just help to get abortion and stuff. It's good for women. And these folk wanted to slaughter all those that they deemed unfit. And it's not putting words in her mouth. She wrote about it and talked about it. It's the same thing too with Sanger. And Sanger called children weeds. She didn't mind her own children being weeds. And don't forget that Sanger herself too was all for the communist system, the socialist system, of free love and all the rest of it. And she had plenty of it and had that dealt with. But she believed that she was superior eventually. And you shouldn't have the children. And she was going to make sure of that. The people you're taught to worship, you should delve in and find out all you can about them. And a lot of folk won't, because they've already made their mind up, because they like what they've got now. They like what they've got. You've got to understand how these things creep every few years into the next phase, the next phase, the next phase. And down the road, if not actually now, we're beginning to see the horror show. We're beginning to see the horror show with the advocating of more and more panels for desk panels for hospitals and things like that. Exactly what Julian Huxley talked about. Everything this man wanted, he's got. It's all here, and more to come yet to be introduced. The specialists like himself, he classed himself as a specialist, you see. And those high up in academia, they were all part of the specialist system, should rule the world. Quite openly, that was his agenda, to rule the world by specialists. and totalitarian-minded people, quite openly. And we're seeing that today, because all you get now is specialists in television. Even with the weather and the weather programs and so on, it might rain today, and there's a specialist to tell you, you better come and you better take your umbrella, huh? And that's exactly, again, what you'll find that Bertrand Russell said. We're training the people to do nothing without the advice of specialists. Training them. And yet most folk take everything that they see on social networking or television for granted, to think it's just happening by itself somehow. They have no idea what's behind it. Why do you think memes are spread across the world suddenly? I've read articles where even MIT puts a lot of them out themselves and studies your reactions to them. It's happening all the time. There's very little out there that's actually free and easy. There's so much of it agenda-driven. Never mind the incredible spying on you to make sure that they can know exactly how to nudge and tweak you along a certain path. And also you find that this article too, it's got what looks kooky or sinister in 2012 struck the pre-war British left as solid and sensible. Harold Lasky, stellar London School of Economics professor, co-founder of the Left Book Club. He's like a communist too. I think he taught communism or socialism or whatever they want to call it. It's all the same thing. He was co-founder of the Left Book Club, it's called, and one-time chairman of the Labour Party. Cautioned that the time is surely coming when society will look upon the production of a weakling as a crime against itself. Now, he's not against us. He's just saying it is on people that people start to notice, and or to be more cautious. In other words, really, that's why he said these things, of how you phrase things, because they all know what their agenda is. So the production of a weakling is a crime against itself. Meanwhile, the J.B.S. Haldane, admired scientist and socialist, warned that civilization stands in real danger from overproduction of undermen. That's the term he used. He says even the Manchester Guardian was not immune. Again, left wing. When a parliamentary report in 1934 backed voluntary sterilisation of the unfit, a Guardian editorial offered warm support, endorsing the sterilisation campaign. The eugenicists soundly urge. If it's any comfort, the New Statesman was in the same camp at the time. And it says, according to Dennis Sewell, whose book called The Political Gene charts the impact of Darwinian ideas on politics, the eugenics movement's definition of unfit was not limited to physically or mentally impaired. It held, he writes, that most of the behavioural traits that led to poverty were inherited. In short, that the poor were generally inferior to the educated middle class. It was not poverty that had to be reduced or even eliminated, it was the poor. And hence the enthusiasm of John Maynard Keynes, director of the Eugenics Society from 1937 to 1944, for those who didn't know. For contraception, essential because the working class was too drunken and ignorant, he said, to keep its numbers down. Every hero they give you is a bit of a monster if you sit and think about it. You know, I wish more folk would think about it. But again, as most folk, as I say, just choose the camp they want to belong to without doing too much thinking, like Jacques Ellul talked about. He's a good philosopher, and he says they get all their ideas or their opinions through osmosis, little bits and pieces of information. They don't really consciously think through it themselves. They're just given the opinions, and that is so true. It's all technique, mind you. And Julian Huxley's brother, Aldous Huxley, sometimes gave out almost little warnings to society about techniques to control all society in such a way, using scientific techniques, they'd be unable to resist or even know what was happening to them. Well, that's here. Now my voice is going again because of all the smoke on Friday from the forest fires. And there's some again started again yesterday, Saturday, because some other fires are breaking out, and again I saw the aircraft going back and forth. So it really is bad for the atmosphere. But they'll blame us all for it too, because it ties in. There's too many of you. You're destroying the planet, etc., etc., etc. And that's where all this stuff came from. It's all part of the same eugenics movement. Truly is. Truly is. And true enough, most of those who are eugenicists have big families themselves, because they've always believed in keeping the superior genes alive to dominate the next generation. So, from myself, Alan Watt from Ontario, Canada, where it's rather smoky up here, is good night. May your God or your gods go with you.